My name is Zach Arnold. I'm a Hollywood film and television editor, a documentary director, father of two, an American Ninja Warrior in training, and the creator of Optimize Yourself. For over 10 years now, I have obsessively searched for every possible way to optimize my own creative and athletic performance, and now I'm here to shorten your learning curve. Whether you're a creative professional who edits, writes, or directs, you're an entrepreneur, or even if you're a weekend warrior, I strongly believe that you can be successful without sacrificing your health or your sanity in the process. You ready? Let's design the optimized version of you. Hello and welcome to the Optimize Yourself podcast. If you're a brand new optimizer, I welcome you and I sincerely hope that you enjoy today's conversation. If you were inspired to take action after listening today, why not tell a friend about this show and help spread the love? And if you're a longtime listener and Optimizer OG, welcome back. Whether you're brand new or you're a seasoned vet, if you have just 10 seconds today, it would mean the world to me if you clicked the subscribe button in your podcast app of choice. Because the more people that subscribe, the more that iTunes and the other platforms can recognize this show, and thus the more people that you and I can inspire to step outside their comfort zones to reach their greatest potential. And now on to today's show. For a long time now, I have wanted to sit down and do an interview with my mom to ask her the big questions about life that we seldom, if ever, really discuss. So for this Mother's Day, I decided that it was time to prioritize this conversation that I've wanted to do for so long, even if it meant that I had to suffer through the perils of recording on Zoom, as opposed to, honestly, chatting face to face. This episode is a very special and personal one that, frankly, I recorded for me. This one's not for social media sharing, it's not for search engine optimization, and it's certainly not to grow an email list. This one is for me. But my hope is that listening to today's conversation with my mom inspires you to reach out to your parents, if of course you are still fortunate enough to have them alive, or instead maybe your siblings, or those who helped shape the person that you are today, so you can have an honest conversation with them just like this one. This is the first of a two-part interview where I have created a series of 20 specific questions that I'm calling 20 Questions to Ask Your Mom on Mother's Day, which can, of course, be repurposed to suit your own personal needs. These questions, to be very clear, were inspired by a similar exercise from high-performance coach Brendon Burchard, and I linked to a Facebook post where he provided these questions several years ago. So on that note, without further ado, this is part one of my conversation with my mom on Mother's Day. And this episode is made possible by our amazing sponsors Evercast and ErgoDriven, who are going to be featured just a bit later in today's interview. To access the show notes for this and all previous episodes, as well as to subscribe so you don't miss the next inspirational interview, please visit optimizeyourself.me/podcast. I am here today with none other than Jane Arnold, which, not a coincidence, is actually my mother. So, Mom, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you very much.
So the reason that we are here is I have a series of questions that I want to ask. This is going to be about your background growing up, going to be about your career, be about your family, and just kind of be about life in general. And this is a series of questions that I put together based on a very similar series of questions from another online writer and influencer and coach. His name is Brendon Burchard, so I want to make sure that I give him due credit. These are not questions I made up off the top of my head, but I did modify them a little bit. But what I find very interesting in talking about coming full circle is that as I was growing up, one of the fond and very frequent memories that I have is that I spent a majority of the first 10 years of my life in a car. We did a lot of driving, going to different places all over the country, and we often played a game called 20 Questions, where we would come up with some person, place, or thing or otherwise, and we would spend hours and hours in the car playing 20 questions. And now we're going to play a game of 20 questions, but it's going to be all about you and your life. So I can learn more about you, and by default, other people that are listening can learn a little bit more about you and life in general. And the hope is that this is going to inspire other people to have similar conversations with their parents.
Sounds good to me. Interesting.
That's the idea. Should be pretty simple. We'll see how far the journey takes us and how long it goes, which will be completely up to you and how deep you want to go with all the stories. So if anybody wants to listen to the other one that I did with my dad, it aired, I don't remember the exact date, but it would have been around Father's Day of 2020, and the exact same questions. And for anybody that's listening, I will have these questions available to all of my newsletter subscribers. So if you want these questions, you can either just listen or you can reach out and I will send them to you. So pretty simple. All right, so we're just going to dive in and we're going to get started. So the first 5 questions that I have are going to be talking a little bit more about your background and growing up. So the first question is, when were you born? Where were you born? And what memories come to mind when you think about growing up as a young child?
I was born in 1944, and you can do the math very quickly. I was born in Chicago. And the first 3 years of my life, we lived in Chicago, very near my aunts and uncles. And my grandmother, in fact, lived with us, or other relatives, I think, thought, that we lived with my grandmother. But we were very happy about it. And to say the least, I loved it. I was her full-time job from the first minute in the morning until the last tucking in at night. I usually spent right with her all day long, and I loved it. She had a very, very strong Irish brogue. She had come to the United States from Ireland at age 19, I think about 1895, and married and had children after that. My mother was her youngest child. That's how that living arrangement happened to come up. But it was a matter of stories and tales from Ireland and being read to and making up poems, something you may be recently familiar with the poems I made up for your daughter for her birthday the last couple of years, which has been so enjoyable for me to be able to do that. But that all comes from my grandmother, whose name also happened to be Jane. Jane is a family name in that side of the family, and Janes go way, way back, a number of generations, actually. And I've always loved that name, very proud of that name. In fact, I realized not too long ago that I have 3 children, and all of you have names with 4 letters in them: John, Kate, and Zach.
Interesting. Or if we were going to really deep down the rabbit hole, and I'm not going to give this entire secret away to my audience, and people that know me personally know this, but technically, Zach is not my 4-letter first name. We're not going to talk about what it is. But for those that don't know, I actually go by my middle name, but my first name is also 4 letters. So funny enough, I don't know if that's a coincidence or not, but
nope, you're exactly right. Well, I was just about to tell you that, told you that yes, you are a member of our family by blood. It's the 4 letters that go with it. So you have 2 4-letter names. So that's really quite distinguished. When I was 3 years old, my father was transferred to the Milwaukee area. And I remember moving day very vividly because I took raw bacon, which was one of my favorite snacks that I don't think anybody knew about. It was the meat that was so tasty, and hid in the bottom huge cabinet of our home. And for quite a long time, in fact, nobody could find me because the moving men were moving in and out from all the rooms of the house. And my mother was getting increasingly upset and hysterical. And my grandmother and it was a sort of a big deal. And I just sat there munching on the bacon, and they finally found me, dragged me out to the car, literally, handed me my dolly, closed the door, and off we drove to Milwaukee. I liked Chicago better, let's just say that. But it's turned out to be a very nice life, and turned out that it turned to be, for me, a life with your dad and with you and with your brother and your sister and all the surrounding relatives. So, although I still like raw bacon.
I was going to say, here we are only 5 minutes into the interview, and I've already learned something about you I didn't know my whole life. I knew you loved bacon. I did not, however, know that you liked raw bacon. So that potentially explains a lot.
Well, it's really those little chunks of meat that are delicious, but I haven't had any in a very long time. But I had a handful. I mean, I literally grabbed a handful, and in the cabinet seems huge, even in my memory now. And they did overlook it. They didn't realize I did that quite often. So
I didn't know that you were such a pioneer for the ketogenic diet. So you'd be a pioneer in the CrossFit community with eating your raw meats. They'd appreciate that.
Well, my gosh, I never thought of that. That's like a whole new life.
It is. There's even a thing called the carnivore diet night, where the only thing you eat is meat. That's it.
I just ordered a diet like that for my cat.
So there you go. You were a trendsetter many, many, many decades ago.
Well, and it's never stopped.
Yes. So the second question on our questionnaire, continuing to discuss this idea of background and growing up. And as you know, as a bit of an aside, one of the reasons I love to do this podcast and talk to other people is I'm obsessed with understanding how people are wired and why they behave the way that they do and why they make the choices that they do and how they're able to achieve the things that they do. And so this is a really cool question for that specifically, which is, what are the most formative memories or experiences that you had as either a child or a teenager that you believe led you to the person that you have become today?
Two that are very closely related. And that was the behavior. I guess that's the right word. The values, the behavior, the interest in other people, the caring for other people that were shown by my mother and father, which were very different. I don't exactly know why. And because they both died so young, and I was so young when they died, I never got the stories from there. There are many, many missing stories in my life because of that. But my father cared deeply for people. He was a marvelous, marvelous father. He loved my mother. He certainly loved us. He concentrated on work, but was very active. For instance, he made it up for our church, a young person's group, a youth fellowship, I believe it was called, which took him away from our home on Sunday nights. And he was all teenagers, if you can imagine, all kinds of things, from dances to hay rides to quizzes to just sitting down and chatting together. And flip that over just a little bit, and you would see my mother sitting in the living room, not saying much to him, but talking to me and my sister about how he was gone and how that was just a shame and he should be home with us, and very strong values and interests and things and stuff. And as a result, my sister and I have more stuff to get rid of as our age increases than I think even that young woman who wrote that book would even dream of. But she was very, very interested in being the best looking, and she was very beautiful, the most beautifully dressed, going to the fanciest places. In other words, their values and their interests were very diverse. But they loved each other very deeply. They were married a very long time before these illnesses took them. At least it seemed like a long time. I guess they celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary, which is not a very long time now, or maybe even then. And it had a strange effect on me, and I think on my sister. She and I are very diverse. I was just crazy about my father, and had questions for my mother, which he brushed off about things like this as I noticed them. And I would say our relationship was okay, but not great. And I have tried. You'd be a good one to tell me sometime, not on the radio, how successful I've been in trying to be either a mix of those two or leaning more to my father's side. But even their own life experiences. She was the youngest of 4 children by several years and was very spoiled. Her older brother, in fact, her oldest brother, put her through Northwestern University because he thought she was way too smart to go only to a teacher's college to become a teacher. So I think her family had a lot to do with her values. As did my father's, kind of negative, long story way. But they were, as I think about it now, such vastly different people. The one thing they had in common was that they loved each other so deeply, and we also saw that. And that we've tried, both of us, my sister and I both, to put that kind of love into our families and maybe lose some of the other behaviors and things that we saw and experienced.
Well, the audience may have picked up on this already, but just to kind of make it clear, I never met your parents because they both passed away before you even had my oldest brother, John, correct? So even he's never met your parents, right?
Yes.
And they both passed away roughly the same time. Wasn't it fairly close to each other?
2 years apart.
And how old were you?
I was 20 when my father died and just barely 22 by a matter of 2 weeks when my mother died. And she died 6 weeks short of my first child being born, and that would be your brother. Yeah.
And how old were they?
They were both 58.
Both 58. Wow, that's interesting. And from what I remember, both cancer?
Yes. My father had Hodgkin's disease, which is a blood cancer, and my mother died of colon cancer. My theory has always been that she really died of a broken heart, that the stress of his illness and then finally of losing him just overwhelmed her. He was sick for 7 years, which is a long time with 2 young teenagers, and that she just simply died of a broken heart. And I really think that in many ways, however psychologists or psychiatrists would put it, that they were so close that, her life just was abbreviated. Boom. She had these 2 lovely young girls with their acne and braces and glasses and all of the concerns that come with that. And I think she just gave up.
Well, I would make an assumption, perhaps, but I feel like an educated assumption, having grown up with you for essentially my entire life from the moment I was born, and frankly, 9 months before I was born, that perhaps the most formative experience that you have for who you are now is having lost them so early, because I don't know anybody that is more fiercely independent than you. Nobody on the planet have I ever met that's as fiercely independent as you are. And I will guess there's probably a connection there.
Oh, I think there's very definitely a connection there. And I'll tell you a secret. I don't think I've ever told anyone this before, but I was going to the hospital one Saturday morning, and I was pretty pregnant by then, to see my mother. In fact, we removed her from one hospital and took her to the University Hospital, Wisconsin University Hospital in Madison. I think that was the day we were moving her. And I got to her, close to her room, and she was talking to somebody, and it could have been, anybody, but it wasn't. She was talking out loud to herself. And what she said was, I've waited all these years to do the things that I wanted to do. And for John and me, my father and her, to do the things we have always wanted to do. And now neither of us will ever do those things, and we will never do those things together. And that was, I think, the single most important formative thing I ever heard about living your life.
Those are certainly important words to live by. And even though you've never told me that story, I would say that your behavior has exhibited that value where if it's something you just want to do, you're going to do it. You don't care if you upset people. You don't care if it's going to, get in the way of somebody's schedule. If it's something that you want to do, you're going to do it. And I think that a lot of that in a lot of ways is probably rubbed off on me, where I think that I know this is one thing I certainly don't get from my father, because this is where he and I are very different, where the two of you are very different. But I've said on the podcast many times, talking about the process of collaboration and working on projects and just taking a job, I know very, very clearly that I am great at working with people. I am horrible at working for people. I'm pretty sure I inherited that from you.
Probably.
I did not inherit it from Dad.
Nope.
One of the things that I talk about on the program all the time, and I know that you follow the podcast and you probably even listened to this interview and read the book, but it's the one by Gretchen Rubin all about the 4 tendencies. And it's something that I feel is a really important framework to better understand relationships and what's a good fit as far as just working with people, the right jobs. And there are the 4 tendencies of the upholder, the obliger, the questioner, and the rebel. And you fall 117% firmly definitely in one of those categories. And I would say that you are definitely the rebel. Would you agree?
Oh, yes, I would.
Yes. I've never met anybody more in the rebel category than you. And I inherited some of that. And I have a lot of a questioner in me, whereas I'm sure you can talk about a little bit later. Probably, I would assume lots of memories of me always questioning things. And if something didn't make sense, me fighting back. And none of that has really changed. I've gotten better at doing it more judiciously, but none of that has really changed.
I think that stuff sticks with you your whole life, no matter how hard you try, if you even bother to try, but try or soften it or change things for different kinds of people, types of people, their needs, how related they are to you, et cetera, et cetera. But yes, and I really do believe in my own heart that it was hearing that. It was so clear. I mean, we were standing probably not 10 feet apart, but she couldn't see me. She was back behind a wall, and I backed up a little bit when I realized who she was talking to, which was herself, and out loud. And I understood the import, really, for the first time, all wrapped up with my own pregnancy and her illness and traveling and all of that, what that all really meant to her. I knew what it meant to me. I knew what it meant to my sister, all the relatives, aunts and uncles, her friends. But I don't think, when I was only 21, that I had ever thought what that meant to her and what that meant that her life was being truncated way before its time, that my dad's had been, and that more importantly to her, their life together had been truncated in such a terrible way.
Well, there are a lot of things that I think a lot of people fear, myself included. But the fear that drives me more than any other fear is very, very similar to that, which is getting to that point in my life where I'm regretting all of the things that I wanted to do, but because of fear, I chose not to. Which is why I will often make the scarier choice and do what some might assume is kind of the crazy option and the less stable one, and there's less security. But whatever that thing is that I'm afraid of trying next, I'm less afraid of it than regretting having not done it. Like, I can't even imagine if I had said 3 or 4 years ago, it would be awesome to get on the show American Ninja Warrior. It just sounds really hard, and I'm afraid that it would get in the way of my job, and it's going to be a lot of work, and I don't know what it's going to do with the family. So it sounds like it would be fun, but it's also kind of scary, and I'm not going to do it. So I can't imagine where I'd be right now had I chosen not to pursue that out of fear, given everything that pursuing a goal like that has given me and all of the other goals that I want to pursue in the future. And again, like I said, I think that this has just kind of been burned in my brain, that this is just one of the ways that I filter my entire life, knowing that I need to make the choice so that I don't regret having not made it later. But I've never heard that story until now. So it's really interesting how just through learned behavior and other conversations that makes complete and perfect sense. And I never heard that story until literally today.
Nobody has. I never told anybody, even my own sister, who who wasn't there, but certainly could have been. That's just what it was. That was literally repeating pretty much word for word exactly what she said. And of course, I waited a little while, walked in her room, hi, Mom, are you ready to go? Can I help you pack? And just like I had never heard it. And
Well, it only took 41 years and a microphone to get the good stories out of you. So that's good to know. I'll remember that the next time I want to have a good chat. I'll make sure it's on the record so I get the good stuff. All right. Well, we've gone a little bit off the beaten path, but in the best ways possible. But going back to our more formal questionnaire, I think you've already answered this one. I'm just going to put it out there just so people know this is one of the questions. But you pretty much already answered this one, which is, what is the most important lesson that you learned from your mom? I would guess this is probably the one, right? So without you knowing it, you already answered my next question on my list, but I don't think you've answered the follow-up, which is, what's the most important lesson that you learned from your dad?
Oh gosh, he was just a marvelous man. Your daughter just had a birthday party last night, and had my father been there, he would have been pretending to stumble down the stairs. He would have gotten himself some kind of clown mask. Just to, kind of scare the little girls, 9-year-old, 8 and 9-year-old girls. He'd be leading them in song at some point and teaching them songs like Daisy, Daisy, give me your, that kind of mirrors you don't. He loved that because kids could never sing it. And then when they all found out what that meant, they were just so thrilled to have this song. So he he lived not the least bit like freely or irresponsibly, but he had this sense of humor that would come out at the strangest times, like birthday parties and hearing this awful stumbling noise coming down the stairs and everyone, oh, Mr. Sutton, are you all right? And there he'd be sitting there with this great big grin on his face and a crooked hat on his head. And yes, indeed, he would. So he kind of combined it all. He was extremely intelligent, very, very popular. So I said, deeply caring about people. But for him, I guess one of the messages I got loud and clear was that life is to be fun. Have fun. He would always say we'd go out the door and be home on time, stay away from that boy, good people. In those years, there weren't probably, I guess, so many dangers, but was probably perceived as heavy dangers if you were a parent of two teenage girls. But life was supposed to be fun. And that whole emphasis my mother had on, pink and green living rooms, because that was what they were supposed to be, was just about when the responsibilities could be put aside for a moment, just have fun. Just have fun.
Well, I would certainly say that has come across more than once as well. Again, not knowing that story at all, but certainly makes sense. And if we're looking at the blend of the influence that I would have gotten from Dad versus you, that's an area of very stark contrast, as I'm sure you would agree. Where it's as if somebody goes back and listens to the interview that I did with him, for his upbringing and very much for mine, it was always about hard work and discipline and following through and doing your best. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that I ended up being the valedictorian of high school. I don't think that's because I was frankly the most intelligent. It just kind of wasn't an option. It just is the way that it was going to be, and that just was what it was. And I know that there were a lot of times that I wouldn't say that you were against that, because you have clearly also been very successful and we're always very supportive. But at the same time, you're like, yeah, but you got to step away and have a little bit of fun and not work too hard too. And I think that I've been working my entire life to find what is the middle ground between those two things. Because my default mode is work 24/7, achieve. But there's also the voice in my head that says it can't come at the expense of the people around me or the quality of life doing it. And I would say that a lot of that voice probably is coming from you.
Well, I think if I just may butt in for a moment, there was a period in your life where I'll just say it. These people are all fans of yours. You were suspended for a couple of days when you were in high school. Not only were
technically
you
8th grade, by the way.
8th grade. Oh, okay, even younger. And the person who suspended you was the principal of the middle school or junior high, who coincidentally happened to be your father.
Yeah, funny how that works.
Yes, isn't that funny how that works? Who called me and said, you have to come and pick up Zach right now. Well, I was busy. I said, why? Is he sick? All the stuff that was. No, he said, I just suspended him and he had the reason and all this kind of stuff. And I kind of fought back, and I finally realized I was fighting a losing battle, and you were probably sitting there, waiting for your loving and heartbroken and your mother to pick you up. Well, I got thinking about it, that you were going to be around for 3 days. And I thought, good grief, we can go to the movies, we can go shopping, we can do, all these cool things during the week. And as I remember it, at least we did some of those things, did we not, while you were suspended?
We did. Yes, it was basically a nice 3-day vacation from school.
Exactly. And that exactly was what I wanted. I wanted to spend that time with you and enjoy every single minute of it. It was a gift. Those 3 days were a gift. You had not set the building on fire. You had not, let the air out of everybody's tires. As far as I was concerned, it was fine. He had to do it for 3 days because he was the principal, couldn't let you off easy. He has never said that. That was my interpretation, but it was my interpretation. And since I was the person with the locks and the keys, we were going to have fun. Just like my father. That I didn't even realize that. And we did. And it's been 3 wonderful, a memory of 3 just great days, like gifts out of nowhere.
Yes, I mean, and like you said, had I done something that was a lot more severe to be concerned about, it'd be different.
Oh,
But
totally different.
it's basically chalked up to boys will be boys in 8th grade, and stupid skirmish that I got into, and we both got suspended, and it was what it was. But I'm with you that to this day, had it been anybody else, I think the two kids would have gotten off with a warning. But he needed to make it very clear that nobody gets away with anything, especially my son. So I think that it was a more severe punishment than somebody else would have gotten, which again was all about the discipline and, you do what you're told. And I think that it was very much making an example. And at the end of the day, it's made for a good story for many years now.
Well, it has. And he hates it every time I tell it. You see, I care a lot about that.
Yes. Well, again, goes back to the rebel tendency of, as long as I'm having fun, I don't really care what other people think.
Yeah. Well, that's true, but don't get suspended again.
Yes. So moving on to the next formal question. It's an extension again of your parents, but let's say that your parents were around today and they would have the opportunity to meet my kids, Elliot and Evelyn. What would they want to share with them?
Oh, first of all, they would be so madly in love with those two kids. I mean, we all are, but I just think, in fact, I said it to your dad not too long ago. I said, what a pity that my parents never got to know the kids, and how fortunate your wife's parents are. Two lovely people, and love those kids like crazy and spend as much time with them as they could. And how wonderful that is that they have at least two grandparents. And that's fine. We're just very fortunate about that. Good choices there, dear. But they would be absolutely crazy about those kids. And their interests would be very similar in some ways. And of course, technologically, totally diverse, but able to be learned in other ways. But just watch them grow up and see them be independent. The gift that I think you and your wife are giving the kids is the freedom and support to follow the things that they love and not be forced into doing things for political reasons or social reasons or society, pressuring them. And I'm sure that Evelyn has never been told that she was supposed to grow up and be the prom queen, if there are still such things as prom queens. Well, that's what my sister and I were told. And we just chuckled behind the scenes looking at each other that was never going to happen. But that was the whole idea. So that kind of freedom is exactly the kind of thing my father would have given them. Let's put it that way. I had not thought about that till right now. But I see those gifts that I never thought about, you knew nothing about until now, given them so openly and with so much love. And the same thing would have been true for you, that you would have had the same, like your other grandfather, your dad's father. What a marvelous man he was, and how he would have loved them, and they loved him back in return. And I have letters that he wrote us, and he said that all the time about your older cousin. In fact, Samantha, she was the one little kid growing up in the middle of all this, and she did know her grandfather, Arnold. And he would say, and give all my love to my precious little girlfriend. And they were just little, he said, I'm totally in love with that little girl. And she'd be just, oh, grandpa. And that would have been a great love affair. And it would have been the same with Elliot and with Evelyn. Totally different interests, very different personalities. He just would have loved the whole thing, just loved it. Those gifts go way back, and the loss of those gifts go way back too.
Yep. Well, I would say that you're doing your best and then some to impart a lot of those same ideals and values on them, just as you did me. And not having them around, it is what it is. But like I said, I never even had a chance to meet them, and both of my dad's parents, I think, passed away by the time I was 8, 9, I can't remember, but I didn't have grandparents for that long, and I'm glad to see that Elliot and Evelyn have 2 full sets of healthy grandparents and have their entire lives, and obviously we hope that continues. So
yeah.
My sincerest apologies for the interruption in the middle of this interview, but if you are a content creator or you work in the entertainment industry, not only is the following promo not an interruption, but listening has the potential to change your life, because collaborating with Evercast is that powerful. Here's a brief excerpt from a recent interview that I did with Evercast co-founders Brad Thomas and award-winning editor Roger Barton.
Living this lifestyle of a feature film editor has really had an impact on me. So I was really looking for something to push back against all of these lifestyle infringements that are imposed on us, both by schedules and expectations. When you guys demoed Evercast for me that first time, my jaw hit the floor. I'm like, oh my God, this is what I have been waiting for a decade.
I also had the same reaction when I first saw Evercast. 2 words came to mind: game changer.
Our goal, honestly, is to become the Zoom for creatives, whatever it is you're streaming, whether it's editorial, visual effects, Pro Tools for music composition, live shot cameras. It's consistent, audio and video, lip sync, always stays in sync. Whether you're in a live session where you're getting that feedback immediately, or you can't get it immediately, so you record the session and you can share those clips with people on the production team where there's no room for any confusion. It's like, this is exactly what the director wants. This is exactly what the producer wants.
What matters most to me is it makes the entire process more efficient, which then translates to us as creatives who spend way too much time in front of computers. We get to shut it down and we get to go spend time with our friends and family.
The biggest complaint, and I'm sure you guys have heard this many, many times, this looks amazing, I just can't afford it.
Tesla had to release the Model S before they released the Model 3. So by the end of the year, we are going to be releasing a sub $200 version a month of Evercast for the freelancer and indie creatives. Anyone who is a professional video creator outside of Hollywood.
I think what we've learned over the last few months is that this technology can translate to better lives for all of us that give us more flexibility and control while still maintaining the creativity, the creative momentum, and the quality of work.
I cannot stress this enough. Evercast is changing the way that we collaborate. If you value your craft, your well-being, and spending quality time with the ones you love, Evercast now makes that possible for you and me. To listen to the full interview and learn about the amazing potential that Evercast has to change the way that you work and live, visit optimizeyourself.me/Evercast. Now back to today's interview. So now we're going to make a little bit of a transition. Like I said, these questions are in kind of 4 different groups. First group of 5 is a little bit more about background. Now this is going to be a little bit more about you and career. So what path did you begin on in life when you first became an adult, and why?
Path toward a career. There was one thing in my life I wanted to be, and always wanted to be, to this very day. And that was to be a lawyer. And that was, believe it or not, because I absolutely fell in love with the Constitution in 7th or 8th grade civics class. Now think about that for a little girl in 7th grade to fall in love with the Constitution. But I was walking home one day and I knew immediately that was what I wanted. And I sort of danced and skipped all the way home because it was just so clear that was it. That was it. Just like when I met your dad, I looked him in the face and fell in love with him, and that was that. And that's what happened with the law. Well, it didn't quite work out that way. I had 2 little kids. All the babysitters were gone. I mean, most people rely on their parents. Well, hello. My sister had moved out of the state by then, and was married. So I listened to Elizabeth Warren's story very, very carefully about that's where she was at one point in her life. But she called her aunt, and she was saying, she was sad because she couldn't go to law school, and she couldn't do this, and she couldn't do that because she had nobody either. And her aunt said, well, I can't be there tomorrow, but I can be there Thursday. And she came Thursday, and she stayed with them, with Elizabeth, and all the time those children were growing up, and for many years after that. And I heard that story on television day before yesterday, I believe. Again, I know that story very well. I lived it, except for the part about the aunt. And I said to your dad, boy, that would have made all the difference in my life if I had just had somebody to take care of those kids that I trusted and loved, and so what a difference it would have made. So my pattern kind of got scattered. My mother had always said, be a teacher, you get your summers off. Well, that did sound very good to me. I thought, well, what the heck? I'll get a teaching degree. Plus, I had so many scattered credits, I would still be there trying to finish it all. So I did. And that's what I knew. And although I was pretty sure I didn't really want to do that, I was very fortunate. I got a call from a local school district, and they had received a large grant for 3 years for a project writing and developing programs for parents of preschool children. It was actually called Project Happy, HAPPE. And would I be interested in coming in for an interview? Well, what the heck? I wasn't going to law school, so I might as well go to Project Happy. And I got the job and got started in one line that way. And over in some meetings, I found out there were people who were interested in doing more work for gifted and talented children. Well, I had to. And it's very evident in your case because your listeners know you well, and certainly true in your sister's case for a whole bevy of reasons in her life as well. And I thought, well, I have 2 gifted kids. I'm very concerned about their education. And I raised my hand and said, well, I'd like to go to that meeting. Well, about 2 years later, I was president of the state group that I had actually helped to form along with 4 or 5 other people. And it was an extremely important time in my life, trying to get things done, which are still not done in Wisconsin for gifted students. But look at you. I mean, look at you, look at your sister, look at your kids. It worked out for us, but not without some work and some pain. And talk about being a little bit of a rebel comes in very handy in a time like that. So that was fine. And then I decided, that was great. And by then, you were on the way. And I thought, well, I think I'm going to try something different. And that was staying home with you. And I loved it. Absolutely loved it. We'd go to the park, remember the Red Slide Park and the Pushing Boy Park and all of the things that we did. And of course, the time came when you had to go to school. And I thought, well, I might as well go back to work. And I saw an ad in the paper. And one of the banks in the state was looking for someone to lead their training program. I thought, we had a checking account, we had a mortgage, and I think that might have been my total experience in banking. But I wrote a very good letter, got called in for an interview, had been in an auto accident about 2 days before and really walked very poorly because my ankles had been injured. And I thought going up in the elevator, oh, Lord, they're going to think, that I'm a damaged person, and now they're going to have to hire me. And, this is going to be embarrassing. How am I going to explain this? They won't even ask, of course, because they do. At any rate, it all worked out. So they hired me, and I ended up, quote unquote, in banking for almost 10 years. Absolutely loved it. It was a time when the whole world was changing. Bankers were supposed to be affable, and I was supposed to teach them to be that way. Well, I had a blast. I just loved it. So then we moved up to the woods where we are still. And that was a whole different experience that led me in many directions, taught me quite a lot, as a matter of fact, including how to deliver lambs, which is just not to the store, but to their mothers. We have 2 new ones now, as a matter of fact. And so that's kind of where my very sloppy career has led back and forth. And I was in the midst of all of this, my ankle was injured in an automobile accident while I was on my way to mail my application to law school at the University of Wisconsin, and not taking it as a omen of things that might not come. I was accepted to law school. And I went to my boss, and she got up and slammed this huge door to her office. She said, why would you want to do that? So you're just going to have to read a lot of hard books, and you're going to lose 3 years around here. So we can make that work if you want. But she said, we'll just give you the first of your promotions, and we'll pay you a lot more money. And she said, it'll be fun. And I thought, well, yeah, that's better than having to move to Madison, and blah, 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 blah. And it all turned out to be true. They gave me promotions. They, helped me make a little more money. It was very interesting, and I'm still not a lawyer, but if I had a chance to do it today, I would.
Well, it certainly doesn't surprise me that you have an interest in constitutional law or the Constitution, because even though we're going to be releasing this audio only, if somebody were looking at the picture right now, they would see what's probably the most iconic memory that I will have of growing up, which is entire rooms that are nothing but bookshelves of books. As a matter of fact, the first 10 years of my life, my bedroom was a library before. And I remember one of the things I used to get so upset about was that I couldn't put posters up in my room because my entire room was nothing but bookshelves of books, literally floor to ceiling. I was surrounded by thousands of books. To this day, none of that has changed. So it doesn't surprise me that, especially given that most of your books now are about either law or the Civil War or history or civic, minded topics. That certainly doesn't surprise me. But it's interesting that you ended up going the teaching route, because this is something that you may have told me, but I know that Dad has told me more than once, especially when I was going to go out to Hollywood and be a big shot and leave the farm and all this and that. He had said to me, you realize that you are a teacher and you will always be a teacher, and the time will come when you choose to make the transition to not doing what you do to becoming a teacher. Are you crazy? I'll never be a teacher. I would never do that. And now here I am. And, obviously a very different form of it. Like, I don't have a certified teaching degree and I'm not teaching ninth grade science or anything like that. But I would say that I have found a unique and 21st century way to become a teacher for a living. And largely that's because of the influence of nothing but teaching at the dinner table 24/7 for my entire life.
Yep, that's pretty well true. And when I go back and look at least my mother's family, pretty much that was the story. I mean, that's who they were. My grandfather on that side of the family, that I never met him either. He was an ordained, in Ireland, he was ordained as the Methodist minister, who are, of course, teaching. That's what they do. My grandmother, I was not the only grandchild. I was the only grandchild fortunate enough to live with her as a young child. But the rest of them heard the same stories, the same poems, all the things that she talked about, the history of Ireland and the people and everything. And almost all my aunts and uncles, except the two who were dentists, were teachers, and one librarian in the group, which is the same thing. And she would have loved your room, by the way.
I'm sure she would have. And given all of the teachers on Dad's side as well, it's certainly no surprise that this is a transition that I decided to make, not completely realizing that that's what I was doing at the time. And it's certainly no coincidence that I married a teacher.
That's absolutely right. It's the family business.
It is, exactly. Some people, they've got all doctors, lawyers, dentists, whatever it is, and we're just a giant gaggle of teachers. So it's funny because I say on the podcast, and now it's making even more sense, but I say this to my coaching students as well. I don't know how to not mentor. It's like I can't even not do it if I tried. So if I have somebody I'm working with that I hire that's on my team or that I hire as an assistant, I don't know how to not mentor them and just have them just go about and do their job and go home. And I think that just comes from being exposed to that 24/7 my entire life, that's just what you do. So I think you've probably answered the next two questions already. But again, for the sake of anybody listening that is keeping track and wants to do the same exercise, the next question is far off the beaten path of where we started, which is what career path or paths have you followed since your first one? You've clearly covered that and then some. And I think you are already covered. And if we haven't, you can go a little bit deeper into it. But the next question is, what do you love or did you love the most about your career? And I think you covered that, but is there anything else that you'd want to add before we move on to the next one?
Oh, the people that I met. I was very, very fortunate that it was this big transition time in the industry of banking because they really didn't know much about what to do with me. One of the things that I was good at, actually very good at, was public speaking. And taking difficult and complex topics like, for instance, Wisconsin's marital property law, which is similar to the property law, for instance, in California, and one of the gigantic tax laws that went through while I was in the bank, and of the future of employee benefits. Talk about excitement. And they'd hand it to me and they'd say, here, this is what we're going to do. We're going to invite all of our, upscale customers, and you're going to explain this and you're going to answer questions. Well, the first time it about scared me to death for about 5 minutes. And I thought, well, I can do that. And I did. And it was very successful. And I had a wonderful time with these people. The tax law wasn't quite as exciting, but the questions were very exciting. And it was very interesting. And the same was true with, believe it or not, the future of employee benefits, which turned out to be, to me, these are exciting to me, to be the most interesting of them all. And I look back now on what I talked about, and I was pretty on topic about the future and what was coming, which was also nice. But the people, I ended up in the working mostly with the people at the highest level in the bank. And in fact, once for another talk I was giving, I picked out maybe 20 of the people I thought were the most gifted. And I actually sent them a questionnaire about being gifted and what was it like to grow up gifted and what was it like, in their careers and so forth, which of course caused a little bit of a stir in the bank, talk about being a rebel, and had lots of very interesting conversations and lots of the ideas I had about how these people grew up and what they felt, how it worked for them. So I was in a position through no gifts of my own. They just hired me because they thought they needed somebody, and they got one, that's for sure. And it was marvelous, absolutely marvelous. When we came up here to the North Woods, that all just disappeared within a year. And that was very difficult to lose all of that. But
I find this surprising and ironic because I wouldn't have even guessed that. And the reason I say that, and it's another area that I see so much similarity, is that you immediately knew the answer was the people. And if I think about what I enjoy doing and the fact that I would guess that just through osmosis, I must have either inherited this from you or otherwise, but I didn't. It's not like you never consciously taught me this, but I too am also a fairly natural public speaker. But listening to both of us talk about it and the fact that I now specialize in helping people build their network and build relationships and pursue the work that they want, you would just assume that you and I are people persons. And it couldn't be any further from the truth, because there's only 2 people on the planet that I know that are more introverted than me. And that would be my brother and you.
Exactly.
Which I find so ironic, given you immediately went to it was working with the people that was the most rewarding part of the process. Because, man, the 3 of us together, we are as introverted and antisocial as you can possibly get.
Yep.
I would say Kate, maybe not quite so much. She's got a little bit more extroversion in her. She's got some of it. But you look up introvert family in the dictionary, and there's our family picture.
Yep, that's absolutely true. And we have talked about this, and your brother John and I have talked about this too. I mean, the whole COVID thing of stay home. Oh my God, that's what I've been listening to. I'm trying to hear my entire life. Stay home. Blah, 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 blah. You don't have to get on buses or airplanes except to go see you. All of these things, just stay put and kind of do what you want because you're fortunate enough to be able to do that. And this, losing all this all of a sudden, and all these happy-looking people in their swimming suits and stuff running around, and I'm thinking, oh, dear God, protect me from that. Not that they're bad people or there's anything wrong with that. They're not, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just not for me.
I'm having the exact same experience right now. And to preface it, I wouldn't wish everything that's happened on the world ever again. And I'm glad that people are going back to work and we're able to have the freedoms to go out to grab food again or whatever it might be. But there's a big part of me that's like, God, I miss there not being any traffic and never having to come up with an excuse to not go to some event or meet with somebody or whatever. Like it was nice. But just from a very selfish and personal perspective, I very much enjoyed the solitude and nothing going on whatsoever, and just finding a way to manage from home. And I'm already finding myself more exhausted from now having to deal with more of the social things and traveling around more. And like as we'll give away, you and I have our Sunday conversations every Sunday when I drive back from my Sunday ninja workouts, and those conversations have gotten a lot longer, which is a good thing. But it's also because I'm stuck in traffic a lot more. So there's a part of me that kind of misses some of the perks perks of the pandemic. And I know that I'm not alone, and I'm probably getting a lot of very furious head nods from listeners, because I think a lot of them probably follow me because I too am a creative introvert and just kind of want to do my thing and be left alone. And there were certain parts of the pandemic that were kind of relaxing and kind of a reboot. So my hope is that at some point we can find a middle ground. And I think that we're rushing back to quote unquote what normal was beforehand without really rethinking how we want to redefine that term. But anyway, that's a whole nother soapbox that I didn't bring into the room today. So I'm not going to get on it. But going back to these questions, I think, again, you've maybe alluded to this one, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into it because I think it's important for anybody to be able to answer this question of themselves. So this is going to be a lesson for not just the two of us, but I think for anybody else listening. And it's a hard question to answer about yourself. But for you, I don't think it's going to be hard. For other people, it can be difficult. What makes you successful, or what made you successful at what you do? What are the core things about you that made you successful?
I think the first was, believe it or not, my sense of humor. It's like they talk about gamers, I think, in sports, that so someone can skulk. Well, I think our own Aaron Rodgers is probably an example of that. When he gets on the field, he plays football, whether he likes it or likes the Packers or anything. He does his job, I think, because he probably loves doing that job. So he's a gamer. And I was, in the sense that I could get up and talk to anybody, talk about a subject, hopefully something I knew something about, and make it interesting and humorous. As I said, believe it or not, those topics were not humorous, any one of them, and there were many others. So my sense of humor, I think, was one. And the other was genuinely enjoying the conversations with individuals, which is what I meant about the people in that group. I didn't mean, 13,000 people who cared. I meant the people I was fortunate enough to be involved with 99.9% of the time, who were very open. There was very little political stuff because we were just a group within the great big group. And when we were together, we were free to do that. And you and I have spent many years talking about peer groups, finding your peer group and being comfortable. And it's very difficult depending on, what strengths you have and what weaknesses, either literal or figurative. And in that group, I found my peer group. It's the only one I've ever found. But it was wonderful. As long as it lasted, it was absolutely wonderful. So that made a difference. But I think my sense of humor even found that peer group for me. So I think that was the thing. I was once asked by our band director when I was in high school to give the narration of the program they were giving of our band trip to New York City for the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, where, by the way, I was asked to carry the United States flag, the good old red, white, and blue. And I thought that was a great honor. But the joke was on me. They gave that to the person who really couldn't do anything else, couldn't play an instrument well enough to, really toot or hear anything or carry a drum, and certainly not throw wooden rifles around in the air coming down, the streets in New York City. So I got to carry the American flag in that. But I was asked then to do this narration. I said, well, where's the script? And the director said, we don't have one. He said, with you, we don't need one. He said, you'll get up there and the first slide will come up. And he said, you're going to say something and it's going to be wonderful. Everybody's going to laugh and applaud and we'll have a couple hours. It'll be terrific. And I did. And it was. And my mother sat there like this, pretty much her hand over her eyes, pretty much the whole time, worried that I might, say or do something. And my father was just all of that loving. So that was a gift that has always given me more than I could even imagine ever in my life. Still does, as a matter of fact. I recommend a sense of humor. Yes,
sense of humor, but I also think the ability, this is a big one that you've touched on, and I think I want to extract a little bit more because I think if I could find one, and I've spent years trying to figure this out, but what is it that makes me successful at what I do, and being able to tell that story succinctly so I can attract other people that either need that service or that are similar to find a peer group. And I think what I have discovered is probably something that comes from you based on what you said about taking these complex topics and being able to extemporaneously speak about topics and make it sound natural and conversational and kind of involve more people. I would say that the skill I have comes from you to take something very, very complex and break it down into very simple, understandable pieces. And again, it's not like you sat me down and tutored me on how to do that. It's just one of those things that either happens genetically or happens via osmosis. But I don't think it's any surprise that that's why I gravitated towards being an editor, because being an editor, you take all of this complex information that's seemingly random and you have to distill it down to the essence of whatever that story is. And you were doing the same thing, but with either very difficult concepts, or you were doing it with people, and now that's what I do. It was when I had come to the realization fairly recently, I was terrified of making this career transition because I'm thinking I have to start all over. I can't use all of the background and the skills that I have as an editor and the technology and the workflow. Like, I'm starting from zero. And then I realized, no, I'm not. I can still use my ability to break down something complex, to simplify it. Only the difference is, instead of editing video material together, I'm helping people edit their own stories together, listening to all the different parts of their story and helping them break it down and figure out what is it that you want your story to be next. And again, it sounds like a lot of that probably comes from a combination of learning how to be a teacher and learning how to break things down from complex to simple with a little bit of a sense of humor.
Yep, I think that's the recipe. I was once asked to be on a board of directors of a very large organization in Wisconsin. And I said, this friend of mine was the president of the board. And I said, Judy, why in the world do you want me? And in fact, when I was a little kid, I had been thrown out of the organization because the uniforms didn't fit this girl who had matured early. The buttons didn't close across my top, and refused to wear it and got out the door I went. And I said, what in the world do you want me for? She said, you're the perfect board member. She said, you sit and listen. She said, I've watched you the last several years. She said, you sit and you listen to everything everybody says. And we get to a point in the meeting and suddenly you speak up and you pull it all together. You extract the threads that really are meaningful. You put them together and you give the sales pitch for whatever it is that we want the board to do. And she said, then they all vote yes. She said, that's why I want you. She said, don't do one single thing different than you've done all along. Just pay attention to the topics that you might not know about well. And don't tell them you got thrown out, when you were 9 years old or whatever it was. She said, but that's what I want you for. She said, I want you to sit there, listen, draw the important threads, pull them together, and give. And she said, the sales pitches you give are very subtle. And she said, they're beautifully structured with all of the points and all of the topics and our goals and our dreams for the future. She said, just do that. She said, you'll be fine. And we went from not having the building that she wanted to build to getting the building with one meeting. And she said, see, that's what I wanted you before. She said, that's what I wanted you for. She said, if you never want to come to another meeting, don't. You're done. You've great service. Perfect.
It's interesting because this isn't even something that I'm conscious of. If somebody asked me, how do I do it? I couldn't tell them. But this is what happens in every single session that I do with somebody, where they just start talking. They will sometimes ramble all over the place and tell 6 different stories. And I'll summarize it for them in about 30 to 60 seconds. And they listen to it and they're like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. And then I said, based on everything you just said, X, Y, and Z, what can we do next to make a change? And they're like, it never even occurred to me, but this is exactly what I need to do next. And when people have said, they're like, I don't know how you can zero in so quickly on the one thing that's driving me crazy that I don't even know that I don't know. And I talk to you for 20 minutes and you find it. I couldn't tell them how I do that. It's something that's just natural. But now I have a better idea of where that came from. Because if somebody had asked me, I wouldn't have even known that was really a skill that you had. Because something we've never talked about before, but again, just through osmosis or genetics or who knows what it is. But that's really interesting to me that ultimately that ability is probably what led to your success, and conversely, it's probably what has led to mine. So that's interesting.
Yep. I couldn't tell anybody either. Cannot tell you for a million years. I have no idea.
I couldn't teach it.
Nope. I think it's one of those things that simply can't be taught. There are things that can't be taught, and I think that's one of them. I think you can be a wonderful cello teacher and you end up with Yo-Yo Ma. Where do you go with Yo-Yo Ma? It's all in his head. It's all in his heart. And you may give them some suggestions about fingering or, moving the cello an inch or two on either side on his shoulder. But what do you do? It's there. And that was the whole thing that the band director realized. Just stand her up, click on the slide, and it just all comes out.
Well, speaking of this idea of things you can't be taught, now I want to transition a little bit to another question that's about the things that you can be taught, but lessons that you never really asked for. So the question is, what do you believe about yourself that has helped you endure difficult times? And what is the most difficult experience you remember that taught you this lesson?
That's a great question.
Yeah, this is a heavy one. This is a really good one.
Mostly I failed. I think most of those lessons, at least for a time, at least, maturity and maybe more examples of those lessons came along. And I finally got, yeah. I think probably I'm flicking back to the lessons that come along with losing your parents like we did. There are lessons there, and particularly what I talked about my mother having said about herself and about her life quietly to herself. And that was certainly a biggie. And then I think basically it actually does, as I think about it now, it does boil down to people and how you treat them and how are they valuable? Is there really a value to people? There certainly was for my father. And there wasn't a lot for my mother. I'm probably being very unfair to her, but I don't think completely. One of the comments that she also made quite frequently was she was a teacher in the Chicago public schools, in the immigrant schools, and she liked that. And I asked her once, I said, why do you do that? You could teach other places. And she said, you never have any trouble with the kids. I said, well, how could that be? She said, you just drop a comment to the mother or the father, and somehow and mysteriously, and she winked, said, it's all taken care of when the father comes home from work. She said, I never have problems with the kid twice, and I never have in all the years I taught. And I thought that was kind of interesting. That's what teaching meant to her, was she could just, collect her money and travel and buy beautiful clothes and so forth. So I think it was learning that very late in life to have greater deal of empathy, if having had none to begin with, or very little, having a great deal more, and just valuing different people for who they were. I grew up in a white bread, white everything suburb of the city of Milwaukee, and my whole life, we live in a cookie cutter world. That was we just were, and we still are. I have a group of girlfriends now. We're all in our late 70s. We all graduated from high school the same year together. And we're still the group to look at, but we're very different in what we've learned and what we do. And I think that was a great learning experience that took actually moving to the farm to get a lot of it, quite honestly, to have different exposures. And I think all of that was a big help, but it took some learning. It took some learning and some listening and some, thinking about it. Is this right? Is this absolutely true? And of course it is.
Before closing up today's show, I would love to ask for just a couple additional minutes of your time and attention to introduce you to one of my new favorite products created by my good friend Kit Perkins, who you may recognize as creator of the Topo Mat. Here is a brief excerpt from a recent interview that I did with Ergo-Driven co-founder and CEO Kit Perkins, talking about his latest product, New Standard Whole Protein.
I'm into health and fitness generally, but I want it to be simple and straightforward. About a year and a half ago, I started adding collagen into my protein shakes. And man, the benefits were like more dramatic than any supplement I've ever seen. So I thought, if I can just get this down to coming out of one jar and it's ingredients that I know I can trust, and you just put it in water and you don't have to think about it.
When people think of protein powders, they think, well, I don't want to get big and bulky, and that's not what this is about. To me, this is about repair.
So a big part of what we're talking about here is you are what you eat. Your body's constantly repairing and rebuilding, and the only stuff it can use to repair and rebuild is what you've been eating. Unfortunately, as the years have gone by, every day getting out of bed, it's like, 2 or 3 creaks and pops in the first couple steps. And that I thought you just sort of live with now. But yeah, once starting the collagen daily or near daily, it's just gone. So for us, job 1A here was make sure it's high quality, and that's grass-fed, 100% pasture-raised cows. And then the second thing, if you're actually going to do it every day, it needs to be simple. It needs to taste good.
Well, my goal is that for anybody that is a creative professional like myself that's stuck in front of a computer, number one, they're doing it standing on a topo mat. Number two, they've got a glass of New Standard protein next to them so they can just fuel their body, fuel their brain. So you and I, my friend, one edit station at a time are going to change the world.
And even better for your listeners, with code OPTIMIZE on either a one-time purchase or that first subscribe and save order, 50% off. So if you do that subscribe and save, that's 20% off and 50% off with code OPTIMIZE. That's a fantastic deal.
If you're looking for a simple and affordable way to stay energetic, focused, and alleviate the chronic aches and pains that come from living at your computer, I recommend New Standard Whole Protein because it's sourced from high-quality ingredients that I trust and it tastes great. To place your first order, visit optimizeyourself.me/newstandard and use the code OPTIMIZE for 50% off your first order. Thank you for listening to part 1 of this 2-part interview with my mom. Don't forget to listen to part 2 when it releases this Thursday. To access the show notes for this and all previous episodes, as well as to subscribe so you don't miss future interviews just like this one, please visit optimizeyourself.me/podcast. And a special thanks to our sponsors Evercast and ErgoDriven for making today's interview possible. To learn more about how to collaborate remotely without missing a frame and to get your real-time demo of Evercast in action, visit optimizeyourself.me/Evercast. And to learn more about ErgoDriven and my favorite product for standing workstations, the Topo Mat, visit optimizeyourself.me/Topo. That's TOPO. And to learn more about ErgoDriven and their brand new product that I am super excited about, New Standard Whole Protein, visit optimizeyourself.me/newstandard. Thank you for listening. Stay safe, healthy, and sane, and be well.